And it's welcome again to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. This is episode 27 or series 4, episode 5, if you're working them out that way. I'm here again this month. Alan's with me again. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Now, those of you who've been with us before know there are a set of rules by which we run this podcast, which you're probably sick of hearing, but it's now part of the format of the podcast. So we have to say this. It's 3 topics. There are 30 minutes to go to do them in. It's roughly 10 minutes topic. Bearing in mind that we were just having to alter the running order just before we came on here because something had occurred that we'll come to later on. We'll see how well we keep to those 3 topics in 30 minutes, but we will try. First up, roughly this time, I'll say a little bit later in the year actually, we produced an infographic along with AIIM. Here is said infographic on the screen. If you are watching, if you're not watching, there's a lovely infographic on screen. And as ever, all of the links and this stuff will be in the show notes, so you don't have to try and keep up or try and work out what we're talking about. There will be, the links for it. But the idea of this graphic, if you remember, Alan, was that we were getting concerned that organizations weren't necessarily knowing what prep work they needed to do before they were starting to get into AI. So we put together an infographic called five questions. Is your organization ready for artificial intelligence? Along with AIM. AIM did the graphic work on it, and we did the words on it. And we put it out this time last year, ish. And I think if I remember rightly, that actually was, I don't know what the stats were, but actually was quite a downloaded thing, wasn't it?
It's been very popular. I don't know the numbers either. It's been very popular. And I use it. I mean, I've done quite a few keynotes and whatever. But I now use this in every presentation. And when I'm actually on stage, as soon as this comes up, the cell phones come out and I start taking pictures of it. And it's been incredibly successful. I mean, if it was this year, I guess we would have just changed the name, wouldn't we? Is your organization ready for agentic AI?
Well, exactly. And I'm glad you enjoyed it because, as we know, there is a large cartoon Alan in the middle of it.
Yeah, Alan doesn't like very much.
Which we'll come back to in a second. We'll just run through what the 5 questions are, and then we'll come on to the reason why we're talking about it now. It's not just, again, self-aggrandizement on our part, although, of course, there always is, because we're doing this in a podcast with our name on it. But really, those 5 questions were when someone in an organization says to you, and it's normally somebody like a CXO says, what's our artificial intelligence strategy? Or we can say now, what's our agentic strategy? Here are the 5 questions that we thought would be worth knowing the answers to. And the answers should be yes to all of them before you're ready to move forward. The first of those being, have you identified the processes that you think AI will improve? Yes or no? Hopefully yes. Then on, can you list the tasks that AI will power within those processes and map them to possible AI solutions?
Yeah, I'm just pausing on number 1 and 2 because they're interrelated, right? And I think one of the big things people are finding out the hard way, well, it's not a surprise to us, but people are finding out the hard way is that AI is seldom ever going to automate a process. It's going to automate some of the tasks within a process. And I think that's important for people. I know we've got another section coming up about separating words, right? But process and tasks are not the same thing.
No, they're absolutely not. And maybe we'll come back to that in just a second. Let's go to just run for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th ones on this just to catch people up. And we discussed this on our previous pod, and I'll make sure I put the links back to that so you can get a more detailed discussion about it at the time it came out. But the 3rd one being, have you identified the quality controlled existing pools of knowledge that you'll feed into AI? So that's the data and data cleansing thing, of which we will be coming back to with a bit of news, actual news that's just happened that we're going to discuss. That we'll come back to a little bit further on in the pod. And then 4, do you know which people and skills you'll need to operate your AI solution? And finally, have decision makers in the organization decided on how you're going to measure success? Really, the critical ones we've found in that period since have been kind of 1, 2, and 3, because if people can get through 1, 2, and 3, they've normally, in the process of getting 1, 2, or 3 right, probably got 4 or 5 as a result of it. in order to get the 1, 2, and 3 right, you've normally found the people and you've normally thought about KPIs during it, but you still need to answer all five yes before you move on.
You do.
So the reason why we brought this up again is that never being someone who wants to not to reuse previously written content to continue to do it, I sat down a month or so ago and thought, what are there specific ways in which planning for agents is different to the planning for AI? Do we need different questions? Do we need 5 new questions? And having spent a lot of time on my whiteboard, I realized that actually not really. The 5 questions were absolutely as valid. But the reasons why you might want to think of them might be a little bit different. So I put out a blog post on 5 reasons for agentic planning. So really going back to those 5 questions and seeing what's changed about them. They all still kind of apply, but what's a little bit different about them. And I kind of a little bit from what you were saying just now, Alan. There's always elements around task and process, but in the first case, really, agents make the AI planning bit more complicated. They make it more complicated because of the number of moving parts in it. When we were thinking a little bit around this in the first instance a year or so ago, we were thinking very much homogeneously, because we were thinking about this not in the thinking of agents, but thinking very much of those assistants and co-pilots that were very much based in that business application. Now, whereas now we are very much looking at heterogeneous environments, so that's a fancy way of saying more than one application. So really something that's reflective more of our entire IT stack rather than a specific walled garden of a single application. Do you think that's kind of fair?
I do. I mean, but I think the key word there is thinking, because I don't think there's a lot of it going on. I'm not saying it won't happen. It will, but yeah, it does add a whole level of complexity, and we're not going to do it. But you could add another question, right? Which is, so number 3 is, have you identified the sources, right, of information, and that's obviously critical, and the quality of the data and everything. And you could expand that out really to, well, how are they going to talk to one another?
And that's exactly the point I think we get to with this, and that's why I think the 2 which are kind of important, I mean, they're all important individually, but really it's kind of question 2 and question 3 within the agentic specific area, I think it gets more important, and there's a couple of reasons why that is. That number 2, can you list the tasks that will power AI within those processes and map into AI solutions? This becomes more complicated when we're not necessarily thinking about an assistant that are a homogeneous one, but we could be thinking about which other applications or data sources outside this application do we need to wire in to the process in order that it works. And that opens up to a whole bunch of other areas that I'm also writing about for a report that will come to probably in July, maybe July's pod, probably by the time I finished it. I've just been drafting it now, which really kind of updates our previous agent stuff and brings in some of that stuff around A2A, so the Google standard, and NCP, the Anthropic standard, of how to plug in other agents and how to plug in other data sources. So that task 2 becomes significantly more complicated, right, as a result.
It becomes so much more complicated because, in reality, getting access to one data source sounds simple, but as we know, it often isn't simple at all, right? So, the HR data, it's in the SharePoint. No, it's not. Again, we're not trying to say this doesn't work. That's not the point here at all. I think our point is, do not underestimate how much time, effort, planning, and sort of, I don't know what you call it, pre-implementation work. Change. I mean, the technology's pretty smart. We're not questioning the technology. We're questioning people's readiness to actually do anything meaningful with it.
Anyone who's done a vendor software project in the last 20 years will know a phase called discovery. And I think about discovery, it happens very early in the project. It's almost pre-project. And it's the point when we align what it is that you think you're going to do with what the software actually does, and to see whether we can really refactor the entire project at this point into deliverable phases, right? It can be quite a big piece of work, and not a lot of people necessarily are always prepared for how involved that process is within the project. The move from an AI assistant type project into an agentic project is a significant multi-factor increase in that discovery period.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just, I mean, here's an unsolicited tip for anybody. Something that's long gone out of fashion and absolutely should come back into fashion is when you have your project plan, right? And you've got your discovery phase and you've got your whatever, right? You've got all your elements of your project. You really should be putting in go, no go points, because these are the kind of things where you start off with a great idea, right? You know this could be improved, blah, 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 blah. You may well get to a point where you go, you know what, this isn't worth the effort. And then you can switch your efforts somewhere else and make a difference. I think the discovery phase of an agentic process is for many, it's going to be the first time they've ever really done true business and process analysis.
Yeah.
And what we know is when you do real business process and business analysis and maybe use process mining and task mining tools, you are going to find out that stuff's going on that you did not know about.
Yep.
And I think this is where you really, really, really should have early on go, no go steps, and not be ashamed at all to say, well, okay, this, no, this is a can of worms. I'm walking away from this. We've got other things we can focus on.
Well, of course, the other thing I think, and we got that question 4 about assembling the right people. One of the things that you find early in a discovery is often it's the first time all the right people on both sides of a project, whether that's vendor and SI and an end client, have ever been in the same room together. By a room, it could be the same call these days, but it's often the same time that all the people who need to actually be aligned have ever been in the same place at the same time. And that's where the refactoring really starts, when those people start.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is, so I was at Automation Anywhere where I picked up a throat/chest infection on the flight back.
Oh, yeah.
Blaming them, but I was at their event a couple of weeks ago, and there was a really wonderful keynote by the former, I'm blanking on her name now, the former CEO of PepsiCo, and she made the point which we have made so many times, and it's worth making again. With these kind of projects, make sure you involve the people who actually do the work today. They're the ones who know where things can be improved.
I would have thought subject matter experts.
They're usually not involved.
Yep.
And with this kind of thing, I would go as far as to say you are virtually guaranteeing failure of your project if you don't involve them at the get-go.
And the bit I was going to go on to talk about, and we're going to loop back a little bit later on when we come to our little breaking news bit, which we don't normally do. It's just some things happened while we were just preparing for it. So I've refactored the way in which we're doing the running order here. Is the element about data. There's stuff in the blog post about it. And of course, we've got our own first-party research that we've done just to find out just how bad people's data actually is. The hint was it's a lot worse than anybody really realized. And maybe that's why the thing that's just happened has happened, but we'll come to a little bit. So let's move on to the exciting sounding subject, BizApp knife fights. Back in January, we talked a little bit about a conversation that Sajid Nadella had on a podcast. It was in the January one. It was a podcast with Bill Gurley, and he was talking about how BizApps are kind of a little bit over because all of the logic in BizApps is all going to agents, and therefore all that BizApps are left is a CRUD database. All the business logic is moving out. And we sat there and gone, ho. I mean, that's fun to talk about in the podcast, but he doesn't really mean that, does he? Well, the trouble is, I think a lot of people think the same, or lots of people listened to that and went, oh my God, he's right. And we're starting to see business application vendors start to get a bit shouty in public about how their platform is going to be the only single one of business applications to cover everything. So in the process of it, we're seeing, Service Desk, ITSM vendor like ServiceNow saying that now it does CRM and it's going to take on Salesforce for, and Salesforce is the largest CRM, but it only covers about 20% of the market, but it's the single largest one. At the same time, Salesforce never won not to have a fight. At the same time saying, well, we're going to start taking on ITSM then. So the feeling is that everything is up for grabs a little bit in terms of business apps. Siobhan Fagan from Rework put an article out around the time of ServiceNow's conference, middle of May, writing about that, and in the process asked you and asked me both separately and collectively to comment, and we both did, and they used both of those things in here. So it's a little bit of self-publicity again, but I think it's an interesting subject to talk about.
It's a really interesting subject, because it's one of those things where I don't think anybody really knows what's going on.
No, not at all.
Well, because and that makes sense, because it's happening in real time. I mean, on the one hand, and all this, the primary research we've been doing this past year, every single survey we've done has confirmed the same thing. People are fed up with their ERP, their CRM, their warehouse management system, or whatever, right? They rather optimistically, I suspect, but they want to rip and replace them, and that's new, right? But you've also got to go right back to how did these massive companies, and we could throw SAP and Oracle into the mix here as well, how did they get their start? They came along with these monolithic business apps, right, with associated services at sort of $10 for every dollar of software. I mean, it was just crazy money. People got locked in and they're fed up. So there's that, right? Nobody has the appetite to go out and do a $50 million ERP project.
No.
And now you have the agent stuff coming along, biting at its ankles. No, saying, well, who wants that? I mean, you just want to fix this, don't you? Well, I can fix that for you. Be that contracts processing or invoice processing or.
Well, if you take the Dulles idea that you can strip out business logic and hold it in your hands like a newborn and say, I'm going to extract that from the business application. If that's possible, then of course he's right. In a reductive sense, that's the most valuable bit. However, there's an awful lot of predicates on your ability to extract all that business logic and hold it in your hands. And having done that, and that's a lot of ifs and buts, then giving that set of logic to an agent and say, well, there you go, you handle that, and it be able to do that and provide business continuity is such a large set of leaps to take in a single bound that I'm surprised that it's taken as seriously as it has been.
Yeah, and I think we also, I mean, I haven't done this in a long time, but I used to have a chart I would use in and here's some charts. I used to have a chart I would use in presentations, and it was sort of, this is back in the day, right? There was HP, some Microsystems, IBM, Microsoft, whatever.
It was an old system. It was an old chart.
And the point is, when you look at the revenues of these big companies, right, they are so much bigger than the startups and the wannabes, right? I mean, they're just they're on another level. So I mean, the likelihood here is there's going to be a lot of M&A over the next few years, because they can. I mean, if somebody really genuinely is threatening them, they'll just buy them. But the biz app market is going through change, because
well, we've got up on screen. What you have, Alan, is an unerring ability to talk about the slide I've not got up. Normally, the next slide is the slide you're talking up. So what I've got up on screen for people who are not watching is a couple of pieces of data from some survey work we did at the end of last year. Again, it's from a survey we did with alongside Highland Software, and I'll put the link in so you can download it from Highland directly, should you wish to. But it's a couple of the questions we had was about some attitudinal stuff about buying propensity, because we were interested to say, well, if AI is coming along, and bear in mind we were doing this survey work before the Nadella Gurley podcast business that we've been talking about. We were wondering if you imbued AI with a certain amount of miracle cure, if you were able to push that miracle cure into the biz apps that you use all the time now, would that make them a more attractive option? Unsurprisingly, the answer is yes, very much yes, yes, please, because nobody really has a lot of time for the tools that they use every day, for the most part. But what's interesting here is when we're talking about biz apps, what we're actually talking about are some of the fundamental core software pieces that big enterprises use: ERPs, HR systems, ECS systems, accounting systems, process management systems. These are the everything that defines how your organization. We're not talking about changing a web front end here or changing a messaging system. We're talking about a fundamental thing that operates your business, and that's what
in many ways you
us a little bit.
Talking about your business, but the value of them, the promise of them was that they were going to automate your business, right?
Yeah.
The reality is that they are systems of record. People, I think I've told this before, right? But if you're at a supply chain conference, you ask who's got a supply chain management system or warehouse management system, every hand goes up, and then you say who trusts the data, and then every hand goes down.
Yeah.
And that's just normal. But that points to what is the value of these systems today. The value of the systems today is the data.
Yep.
Because there's a huge amount of data and rules and whatever in there. It's not the application itself. They don't like the application itself.
Well, so that brings us a little bit closer to the piece of news that happened just before we say came on air. Did podcast come on air, or did two gimps in their spare room sit staring at a webcam? That's probably more applicable to this one. But if you follow the kind of M&A markets around software, last April there was a fairly strong rumor that Salesforce was going to buy data firm Informatica. And we got very excited about it. In fact, so much so that I actually worked up a whole bunch of research notes just in case it happened, so we had something to write about or talk about on the pod. And then it didn't happen. And then Saturday this week, Wall Street Journal started saying, "Oh, the deal's back on again." I sat down this morning after the bank holiday. We're recording this on Tuesday the 27th, so just after the spring bank holiday in the UK. And is it Memorial Day? Memorial Day weekend in the US. Wall Street Journal saying, "Oh, it's going to happen imminently." So I think, hey, you know what? Let's put some notes in for the podcast to talk about it. And in the 5 minutes before we started recording, the deal got confirmed. So Salesforce have announced they're doing their Q1 numbers come out tomorrow on the 28th. I thought maybe they would announce it alongside the numbers. They decided to do it the day before, possibly because the Wall Street Journal broke the news. So I wrote some stuff this morning on Blue Sky. I don't post on X anymore. I post on Blue Sky. It's not that busy, but I put some notes on there, and I put them on screen now just to remind myself of what I was thinking about for this deal this morning, having referred back to it. And I said, for me, it's indicative. There's a realization over time that a lot of the data required to make AI stuff work is not in exciting, contemporary, modern data lakes. It's in old-fashioned on-prem data stores. And in order to move it into such a place as you can make it work for AI, you're going to need ETL to extract, transform, and load that understands how to deal with this old data. So whereas Informatica might seem to be, a previous generation of data tools, they would obviously disagree, and that's not how it will be talked about in terms of the transaction. Where it is vital is it gives Salesforce a whole bunch of tools to get old data into data clouds where they can start charging transactionally for it, and therefore being able to activate it for things like Agentforce. That's kind of my take on it. I know that I don't know how you feel about Alan.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so I mean, this one actually makes sense. I think the other thing to point out here is the deal is 8 billion, which is obviously a staggering amount of money. But bearing in mind, Salesforce spent nearly 28 billion on Slack.
Yeah.
This
makes it like a bargain.
Makes this look like a bargain. Yeah. And a smart buy, frankly.
And obviously we don't know the terms of the deal, and in fact, actually, that's not something that to the kind of M&A work that we do here. We don't get into deal terms particularly anymore in terms of its value. We're interested much more into the tactical and strategic, which we'll come to in a second, but also what this means in terms of our general research practices. And actually, it speaks relatively well to it, which is, hey, data is important. A lot of it is old and clunky. You're going to need proper tools to shift it and transform it and make it suitable. It's not just, we'll go and grab this data and activate it. There are specific issues around using it. Not just data quality, that's part of it. ETL, of course, is a whole bunch of stuff, and data quality is a part of that. But really, if you want to start moving that into an active data lake type product like Data Cloud, which you will need to for Agentforce, or an equivalent external one, which you can then zero copy, and I use that with horrible air quotes, into it, you're still going to need to move it off the on-prem store that a lot of it is in. I think that's probably the rationale and reason.
Yeah, and nobody actually knows the real number. Nobody. And I wish we could pull this out in some of our survey work, to be honest with you, but I don't even know if companies know the answer. The vast majority, the rumor goes, the vast majority of true enterprise data is still on premises. And
well, we know from an SAP, because of that legal case around SAP going on, they've had to reveal how much of SAP's business is still on
most of it is on
and
premises.
If we think, and most of it is, and if SAP is typical, then and you can argue about how typical it isn't, but at least it gives you a working number.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably another rabbit hole to go down another day. But also, just as an analyst tip here, when things are in a private cloud, it's sort of on premises. So 20 years after everything's going to the cloud, most stuff's still on premises.
Yeah. So we'll put the further links to this end of this topic in here. We'll put the link to the rework article where Alan and I say a whole bunch of other controversial stuff that we didn't actually cover because it wasn't relevant, and it's just not about reading our own quotes out. You can do that in your own time. So we'll get on to our third topic, and I mentioned tactical versus strategic, and the reason I talk about this is, one, Alan posted something called "Why Mixing Up Strategy and Tactics is a Red Flag for Your Software Business," and we've been talking a lot about strategic and tactical internally within Deep Analysis, about organizing the ways in which we help organizations, and perhaps sometimes we don't, often because we can't commercially and confidentially. We do an awful lot more tactical work than I think anybody realizes. It's, much as you like to think the analyst work is sitting here and wondering what the future will be like, and there's a portion of it that is that's not really what pays bills.
No.
What pays bills is tactical.
It's funny, it's one of those things you just assume, and it's not to be patronizing or condescending, you just assume everybody knows the difference between strategy and
they don't.
And they don't, and it's really important. It's really,
come on, give us some working definitions off the top of your head with your fresh with your morning caffeine,
which is coming today from Automation Anywhere's mug. I got that. It's a really nice mug. There we go.
Did you realise, having done that, other people are going to insist that we get their swag and use their swag?
Well, it's got to be good swag. Not another backpack, please. I mean, at the end of the day, strategic is your long-term planning, right? It's goal setting, right? You're going to set a 10-year goal. What is my goal in 10 years, right? To be a multi-millionaire, it's whatever your goal is, I don't know, right? To have an IPO, and that's your strategy. That's your strategic stuff. What's our mission? What are we trying to ultimately achieve here, right? And then your tactics are, well, if you've set a 10-year goal, okay, so where are we at in 5 years? Where are we at in 3 years? Where are we at in a month? And in the software, what do we do this quarter?
Yep.
What do we do next quarter, right?
Yep.
And, you know, these are, I think you're the one who pointed out baby steps are actually the hardest steps that anybody ever takes, right? So they are, these are really that important. And you see it so often when people say, oh, you know, and they start talking strategy and you're thinking, what are you talking about? This is just something you've come up with. How does this align with where you want to get to?
Yeah.
And it isn't.
Yeah.
It's
And
somebody's latest bright idea.
well, and I'm back to, you know, conversation I either was in or heard. I was stood near the conversation when it happened. That's a nice way to put it, with former HP and an Oracle exec, Mark Hurd, a few years, or 10 years ago, I think, when I was at an Oracle conference, what he was saying to people, particularly around sales and marketing technology, but I think the whole thing is kind of evergreen. CEO last 6 quarters, what are you going to do for me this quarter? That's what I care about when I'm buying. And and I think that's important for us to remember, is that the pressure on executives who are signing off deals is, I need something out of this quickly, which is going to make the needle go in a certain direction, or I'm badly on the hook for the money I've just signed off.
Yeah, I think there's a caveat here, though.
Okay.
Which, if you are Oracle or Salesforce, yeah, or SAP or Microsoft, the pressure on you to have a long-term strategy is much less, right? Because at the end of the day, you could shut up shop, never sell another product, and there'd still be billions of dollars coming in every quarter. Right?
Well, and a good example of that would be what's happening, if you haven't been following that news, with Broadcom's ownership of VMware, and that's causing a whole lot of heartache for it. And it's not because VMware is doing anything; it's literally a legacy business that's being squeezed like a wet rag to generate more revenue. So you're right in that respect.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't remember the names of them now, but there were a bunch of them that had massive IPOs in the .com era. They've never done anything since, but they're still making money. So, but the point is, most of the companies we deal with, you're right, from an executive, from their personal perspective, they need results. They need results this quarter, next quarter, whatever. If you're a startup, the pressure's enormous, right? The pressure is absolutely enormous. So we deal with tactical things right now, but they should tie back to a strategy. That's my point, right? So if you're a startup, and if you're being honest, what you really want is somebody to buy you in the next 5 years, right?
That's true of more. That's true. It's certainly true of more vendors than will admit it.
Yeah, way more than would ever admit it, but we all know it's to be true, right? Okay, so what are you going to do to meet this quarter or the next 2 quarters' demands, but that also progress you towards that end goal? Right.
Yeah. So we're looking for tactics which are cohesive towards a strategic goal.
Yeah. And it's so important. I mean, we've talked about this many, many times, but it's always just your heart sink, because the truth is, most of the startups we speak to, we really do wish them the best, right? Because this is tough. I mean, yeah, some of them end up getting rich and whatever, and they do their thing and they drive their well, I was going to say they drive their Teslas, not so much now, right? But whatever, they're going to do. A lot of them fail. A lot of them fail, and you see the signs of failure so early on with many of them. They're selling to anybody who turns up. They'll take anything that comes in the door. There is no strategy, and they spread themselves too thin. And even a company like Deep Analysis, we do actually genuinely decline to bid on some proposals. We because they're not aligned, right? They're outside our space. They're not for us. And it's really hard for a company to do that, but many startups need to be much more focused. So let's give another tactical thing, right? One I've been saying to a lot of people the last couple of years, a lot of companies. If you've got a small marketing budget, focus 80% of it on one industry vertical,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you can suddenly become a name in that industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we've talked about supply chain a lot. It's big green field for a lot of things, right? Okay, well, let's start turning up at the supply chain events. Start writing things for their magazines. Start get on all of the boards, right? Within 6 months, a surprising amount of companies in supply chain will now know you exist.
Yeah.
When you're spreading your small marketing budget over anything that happens to come along, it's just, well, there's a phrase I'm not going to use, but you are just, well, let's say it, you're just pissing in the wind.
Yeah.
It's absolutely meaningless. But so many companies do it.
Yep. Because I mean, particularly for mid-tier companies, all of a sudden start to go, well, now we can pitch to the board of GE, and they'll try that for a while and realize actually they've got to a certain point, but you can't have that conversation. Certainly, you won't be introduced to having that conversation. You can't have that. And in the meantime, you might have wasted 2 or 3 quarters of time when you could have been building a nice pipeline by chasing deals you believe exist at a much higher tier of value.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into trouble. I would like to name the company because I actually want to give them a thumbs up, but just an abundance of caution, I won't. We did a project. You helped me, or did Dan? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. On building permit software a couple of years back, right? Who knew there was a building permit software market, right? Anyway, so whatever, that company did that, and I just saw this week they've just won some award in Australasia for something related to, I mean, they had a plan. They knew they needed another vertical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did the research, they got their foot in the door, they started establishing themselves, and they knew this was going to take time. And you know what, it's paying off for them. That's awesome. Tactics tied to strategy.
Perfect. Well, we've kind of overshot. I'm going to blame the news. The news bit overshot here, but yeah, that's kind of it for this episode. Again, tactics and strategy, and all the topics prior to that, all will be in the show notes, which will either be out in a few days or potentially are down the page from where you're watching this right now, or if you're listening to this via podcast app, go to deepanalysis.net and I'll find it all. If you can't remember that, just go to LinkedIn and find one of us. We'll all promote this stuff. But anyway, next time I think Dan's going to be on as the guest, so that'll be 3 more topics, very highly IDP focused, and 30 more minutes to discuss them in. Thanks for joining, Alan.
Thank you,
and thanks everybody for watching and listening, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.